Welcome back, squadron. In this video we will continue the steps to make a good, most vital, correct decision. First, we need to know why pilots should study risk. During each flight, the single pilot makes many decisions under hazardous conditions. To fly safely, the pilot needs to assess the degree of risk and determine the best course of action to mitigate the risk. How we can explain assessing risk. For the single pilot, assessing risk is not as simple as it sounds. For example, the pilot acts as his or her own quality control in making decisions. If a fatigued pilot who has flown 16 hours is asked if he or she is too tired to continue flying, the answer may be no. Not must be no. Because most pilots are goal-oriented, and when asked to accept a flight, there is a tendency to deny personal limitations while adding weight to issues not germane to the mission. And it's very dangerous. For example, pilots of helicopter emergency services, EMS, have been known, more than other groups, to make flight decisions that add significant weight to the patient's welfare. These pilots add weight to intangible factors, the patient in this case, and fail to appropriately quantify actual hazards, such as fatigue or weather, when making flight decisions. The single pilot who has no other crew member for consultation must wrestle with the intangible factors that draw one into a hazardous position. Therefore, he or she has a greater vulnerability than a full crew. Examining National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, reports and other accident research can help a pilot learn to assess risk more effectively. For example, the accident rate during night visual flight rules, VFR, decreases by nearly 50% once a pilot obtains 100 hours and continues to decrease until the 1,000-hour level. The data suggests that for the first 500 hours, pilots flying VFR at night might want to establish higher personal limitations than are required by the regulations and, if applicable, apply instrument flying skills in this environment. The origin of the NTSB was in the Air Commerce Act of 1926, which assigned the United States Department of Commerce responsibility for investigating domestic aviation accidents. Several risk assessment models are available to assist in the process of assessing risk. The models, all taking slightly different approaches, seek a common goal of assessing risk in an objective manner. The most basic tool is the risk matrix. Next figure assesses two items: the likelihood of an event occurring and the consequence of that event. Risk assessment matrix. Likelihood of an event. The likelihood is nothing more than taking a situation and determining the probability of its occurrence. It is rated as probable, occasional, remote, or improbable. For example, a pilot is flying from point A to point B, 50 miles, in marginal visual flight rules, MVFR, conditions. The likelihood of encountering potential instrument meteorological conditions, IMC, is the first question the pilot needs to answer. The experiences of other pilots, coupled with the forecast, might cause the pilot to assign occasional to determine the probability of encountering IMC. Severity of an event. The next element is the severity or consequence of a pilot's actions. It can relate to injury and/or damage. If the individual in the last example before is not an instrument-rated pilot, what are the consequences of him or her encountering inadvertent IMC conditions? In this case, because the pilot is not IFR rated, the consequences are catastrophic. Probable. An event will occur several times, occasional. An event will probably occur sometime, remote. An event is unlikely to occur, but is possible, improbable. An event is highly unlikely to occur. Catastrophic. Results in fatalities, total loss, critical. Severe injury, major damage, marginal. Minor injury, minor damage, negligible. Less than minor injury, less than minor system damage.
It's a risk assessment.
Although the matrix provides a general viewpoint of a generic situation, a more comprehensive program can be made that is tailored to a pilot's flying. This program includes a wide array of aviation-related activities specific to the pilot and assesses health, fatigue, weather, capabilities, etc. The scores are added and the overall score falls into various ranges, with the range representative of actions that a pilot imposes upon himself or herself. And every time you checked at any item it will increase your score, then it will drop on the chart next to show you the degree of risk that you will be. How can we mitigate risk? Risk assessment is only part of the equation. After determining the level of risk, the pilot needs to mitigate the risk. For example, the pilot flying from point A to point B, 50 miles, in MVFR conditions has several ways to reduce risk: wait for the weather to improve to good visual flight rules, VFR, conditions, take an instrument-rated pilot, delay the flight, cancel the flight, drive. One of the best ways single pilots can mitigate risk is to use the unsafe checklist to determine physical and mental readiness for flying. 1. Illness. Am I sick? Illness is an obvious pilot risk. 2. Medication. Am I taking any medicines that might affect my judgment or make me drowsy? 3. Stress. Am I under psychological pressure from the job? Do I have money, health, or family problems? Stress causes concentration and performance problems. While the regulations list medical conditions that require grounding, stress is not among them. The pilot should consider the effects of stress on performance. 4. Alcohol. Have I been drinking within 8 hours? Within 24 hours? As little as 1 ounce of liquor, 1 bottle of beer, or 4 ounces of wine can impair flying skills. Alcohol also renders a pilot more susceptible to disorientation and hypoxia. 5. Fatigue. Am I tired and not adequately rested? Fatigue continues to be one of the most insidious hazards to flight safety, as it may not be apparent to a pilot until serious errors are made. 6. Emotion. Am I emotionally upset?
The PAVE checklist. Another way to mitigate risk is to perceive hazards. By incorporating the PAVE checklist into pre-flight planning, the pilot divides the risks of flight into 4 categories: pilot and command, PIC, aircraft, environment, and external pressures, PAVE, which form part of a pilot's decision-making process. With the PAVE checklist, pilots have a simple way to remember each category to examine for risk prior to each flight. Once a pilot identifies the risks of a flight, he or she needs to decide whether the risk, or combination of risks, can be managed safely and successfully. If not, make the decision to cancel the flight. If the pilot decides to continue with the flight, he or she should develop strategies to mitigate the risks. One way a pilot can control the risks is to set personal minimums for items in each risk category. These are limits unique to that individual pilot's current level of experience and proficiency. For example, the aircraft may have a maximum crosswind component of 15 knots listed in the Aircraft Flight Manual, AFM, and the pilot has experience with 10 knots of direct crosswind. It could be unsafe to exceed a 10-knot crosswind component without additional training. Therefore, the 10-knot crosswind experience level is that pilot's personal limitation until additional training with a certificated flight instructor, CFI, provides the pilot with additional experience for flying in crosswinds that exceed 10 knots. One of the most important concepts that safe pilots understand is the difference between what is legal in terms of the regulations, and what is smart or safe in terms of pilot experience and proficiency. P equals pilot in command, PIC. The pilot is one of the risk factors in a flight. The pilot must ask, am I ready for this trip? In terms of experience, recency, currency, and physical and emotional condition. The unsafe checklist provides the answers. A equals aircraft. What limitations will the aircraft impose upon the trip? Ask the following questions. Is this the right aircraft for the flight? Am I familiar with and current in this aircraft? Aircraft performance figures and the AFM are based on a brand new aircraft flown by a professional test pilot. Keep that in mind while assessing personnel and aircraft performance. Is this aircraft equipped for the flight? Instruments? Lights? Is navigation and communication equipment adequate? Can these aircraft use the runways available for the trip with an adequate margin of safety under the conditions to be flown? Can these aircraft carry the planned load? Can these aircraft operate at the altitudes needed for the trip? Does this aircraft have sufficient fuel capacity, with reserves, for the trip legs planned? Does the fuel quantity delivered match the fuel quantity ordered? V equals environment. Weather. Weather is a major environmental consideration. Earlier it was suggested pilots set their own personal minimums, especially when it comes to weather. As pilots evaluate the weather for a particular flight, they should consider the following. What is the current ceiling and visibility? Consider having higher minimums for ceiling and visibility in mountainous terrain, particularly if the terrain is unfamiliar. Consider the possibility that the weather may be different than the forecast. Have alternative plans and be ready and willing to divert, should an unexpected change occur. Consider the winds at the airports being used and the strength of the crosswind component. If flying in mountainous terrain, consider whether there are strong winds aloft. Strong winds in mountainous terrain can cause severe turbulence and downdrafts and be very hazardous for aircraft even when there is no other significant weather. Are there any thunderstorms present or forecast? If there are clouds, is there any icing, current or forecast? What are the temperature, dew point spread and the current temperature at altitude? Can descent be made safely all along the route? If icing conditions are encountered, is the pilot experienced at operating the aircraft's de-icing or anti-icing equipment? Is this equipment in good condition and functional? For what icing conditions is the aircraft rated if any? Terrain. Evaluation of terrain is another important component of analyzing the flight environment. To avoid terrain and obstacles, especially at night or in low visibility, determine safe altitudes in advance by using the altitudes shown on VFR and IFR charts during pre-flight planning. Use maximum elevation figures, MEFs, and other easily obtainable data to minimize the chances of an in-flight collision with terrain or obstacles. Airport. What lights are available at the destination and alternate airports? VASI/PAPI or ILS glide slope guidance? Is the terminal airport equipped with them? Are they working? Will the pilot need to use the radio to activate the airport lights? Check the notices to airmen, not AM, for closed runways or airports. Look for runway or beacon lights out, nearby towers, etc. Choose the flight route wisely. An engine failure gives the nearby airports supreme importance. Are there shorter or obstructed fields at the destination and/or alternate airports? Airspace. If the trip is over remote areas, is there appropriate clothing, water, and survival gear on board in the event of a forced landing? If the trip includes flying over water or unpopulated areas with the chance of losing visual reference to the horizon, the pilot must be prepared to fly IFR. Check the airspace and any temporary flight restriction, TFRs, along the route of flight. Nighttime. Night flying requires special consideration. If the trip includes flying at night over water or unpopulated areas with the chance of losing visual reference to the horizon, the pilot must be prepared to fly IFR. Will the flight conditions allow a safe emergency landing at night? Perform pre-flight check of all aircraft lights, interior and exterior, for a night flight. Carry at least 2 flashlights, one for exterior pre-flight and a smaller one that can be dimmed and kept nearby. E equals external pressures. External pressures are influences external to the flight that create a sense of pressure to complete a flight, often at the expense of safety. Factors that can be external pressures include the following. Someone waiting at the airport for the flight's arrival. A passenger the pilot does not want to disappoint. The desire to demonstrate pilot qualifications. The desire to impress someone. Probably the 2 most dangerous words in aviation are watch this. The desire to satisfy a specific personal goal, get home-itis, get there-itis, and let's go-itis. The pilot's general goal completion orientation. Emotional pressure associated with acknowledging that skill and experience levels may be lower than a pilot would like them to be. Pride can be a powerful external factor. Managing external pressures. Management of external pressure is the single most important key to risk management because it is the one risk factor category that can cause a pilot to ignore all the other risk factors. External pressures put time-related pressure on the pilot and figure into a majority of accidents. The use of personal standard operating procedures, SOPs, is one way to manage external pressures. The goal is to supply a release for the external pressures of a flight. These procedures include but are not limited to: allow time on a trip for an extra fuel stop or to make an unexpected landing because of weather. Have alternate plans for late arrival or make backup airline reservations for must-be-there trips. For really important trips, plan to leave early enough so there would still be time to drive to the destination, if necessary. Advise those who are waiting at the destination that the arrival may be delayed. Know how to notify them when delays are encountered. Manage passengers' expectations. Make sure passengers know that they might not arrive on a firm schedule, and if they must arrive by a certain time, they should make alternative plans. Eliminate pressure to return home, even on a casual day flight, by carrying a small overnight kit containing prescriptions, contact lens solutions, toiletries, or other necessities on every flight. The key to managing external pressure is to be ready for and accept delays. Remember that people get delayed when traveling on airlines, driving a car, or taking a bus. The pilot's goal is to manage risk, not create hazards. Pilot. A pilot must continually make decisions about competency, condition of health, mental and emotional state, level of fatigue, and many other variables. For example, a pilot may be called early in the morning to make a long flight. If a pilot has had only a few hours of sleep and is concerned that the congestion being experienced could be the onset of a cold, it would be prudent to consider if the flight could be accomplished safely. A pilot had only 4 hours of sleep the night before being asked by the boss to fly to a meeting in a city 750 miles away. The reported weather was marginal and not expected to improve. After assessing fitness as a pilot, it was decided that it would not be wise to make the flight. The boss was initially unhappy, but later convinced by the pilot that the risks involved were unacceptable. Environment. This encompasses many elements not pilot or airplane related. It can include such factors as weather, air traffic control, navigational aids, nav aids, terrain, takeoff and landing areas, and surrounding obstacles. Weather is one element that can change drastically over time and distance. A pilot was landing a small airplane just after a heavy jet had departed a parallel runway. The pilot assumed that wake turbulence would not be a problem since landings had been performed under similar circumstances. Due to a combination of prevailing winds and wake turbulence from the heavy jet drifting across the landing runway, the airplane made a hard landing. The pilot made an error when assessing the flight environment. Aircraft. A pilot will frequently base decisions on the evaluations of the aircraft, such as performance, equipment, or airworthiness. During a pre-flight, a pilot noticed a small amount of oil dripping from the bottom of the cowling. Although the quantity of oil seemed insignificant at the time, the pilot decided to delay the takeoff and have a mechanic check the source of the oil. The pilot's good judgment was confirmed when the mechanic found that one of the oil cooler hose fittings was loose. External pressures. The interaction between the pilot, airplane, and the environment is greatly influenced by the purpose of each flight operation. The pilot must evaluate the 3 previous areas to decide on the desirability of undertaking or continuing the flight as planned. It is worth asking why the flight is being made, how critical is it to maintain the schedule, and is the trip worth the risks. On a ferry flight to deliver an airplane from the factory, in marginal weather conditions, the pilot calculated the ground speed and determined that the airplane would arrive at the destination with only 10 minutes of fuel remaining. The pilot was determined to keep on schedule by trying to stretch the fuel supply instead of landing to refuel. After landing in a low fuel state, the pilot realized that this could have easily resulted in an emergency landing in deteriorating weather conditions. This was a chance that was not worth taking to keep the planned schedule.
We have reached the end of the video today. You need to review the video, and write down the critical point. Next time, we will continue, but you need to remember these video details. Study well and prepare yourself in your notebook. Also, you can have a glance at human factors and behavior.